Welcome to the entire plot of Heir of Fire by Sarah J. Maas. I plan to do an entire plot breakdown of every single one of the Throne of Glass books, so subscribe if you want to stick around and see those rundowns. Today we're going to be covering chapters 19 through 35, so basically we're going to be finishing all of the part 1 portion of Heir of Fire. Chapter 19, Kale's POV, because if you remember, last time we saw Kale, he was being chloroformed and kidnapped once again. So he's dragged into the building that Aedion went to, which, as we know, Celaena once told him that she was pretty sure that's where the rebels were like doing their meetings. Sure enough, he has his thing taken from off of him and he's like, yep, okay, these are the rebels and this is Aedion. He's like, you know what? If I'm going down swinging. So he's like, you may think that Aedion's a part of your movement, but if you notice the obsidian ring, that's how the king mind controls people. So Aedion's most likely a traitor. Okay, calm down. Like, way to throw someone else under the bus. But Aedion actually reveals, and this is what's crazy, he noticed something was off about the ring. So he had a replica made, and the one that he was given by the king is like long gone. Like, he threw it into the ocean. The one he's wearing is a fake. So Aedion is in fact not mind controlled by the king. And they start openly talking in front of Kale, and this is where Kale realizes he's dead. Because if you think about it, like, he knows way too much for them to let him walk out of there alive. So he decides to take the biggest gamble, which is so annoying because it's not even a gamble with his own life, it's a gamble with a lot of other people's lives. But he just looks at them and he says, Aelin is alive. So we're gonna jump to Aedion's POV. Now we get some more backstory about Aedion that makes him seem more like a human being. He had all but sworn his life to Aelin, and that's actually a very big thing that we'll get into soon. He was basically her sword. Like, that basically just means like he's her #1 protector. But basically the day that Aderlin invaded, he was separated from Aelin, and he to this day has like never forgiven himself for not being by her side on that day. He basically has held himself responsible for her death. That's also why we find out he serves the king. Like, it's a way to punish himself. Everyone grieves differently, but this to me has always been like, really? You're gonna punish yourself by helping? Okay. But in all reality, it's never even occurred to him that she might be alive. Like, he has always told himself that Aelin is dead. So he wants to know more, but Kale is of course saying that he'll only speak to Aedion, which in my opinion, thank goodness Kale does at least something right, and he's not gonna tell a whole bunch of strangers what he knows. They go off to the side and Kale tells Aedion everything about how she was found in a river, how she was found by Arab and Hamel, how she became one of the most notorious assassins, how she went to the end of your salt mine camps, how she was chosen to compete in the competition from book 1, and then how she won, and how she's the king's champion, and all of it. But then he gets to the part where he found out who she was and had her sent away to Wendelin. Now, I don't know what Kale was expecting, if he was expecting unending gratitude from Aedion, but Aedion is fuming. He is furious because a couple things. One, he's like, how could you be so dumb? Like, you did not know my allegiances. Like, you basically threw Aelin under the bus to save your butt in case you died. Also, what if Aedion was working for the king? Like, he just took his word about the ring, but like, what if he was? And then because Aedion was Aelin's sworn protector, and we learned in the past part that Aelin's mother at all costs kept her away from her sister Maeve, Aedion knows why she was kept from Maeve, and he's like, you do realize you sent her to Maeve. Of all the people, you can send her away anywhere, but to Wendelin, like, that's the place you chose to send her? Obviously, Kale doesn't fully understand what he's done. He doesn't understand Fae politics. He's like, oh shoot, was that not the right thing to do? As much as Aedion and Kale hate each other, and probably hate each other more now because of this interaction, they realize that the only way that they can keep everything from falling apart is if they work together. Chapter 20, we're going to be in Celaena's point of view. Basically, we find out that, much like where we left her off, every day after training, she is going to the kitchens, she's shoveling down as much food as possible, she's sitting in the back of the kitchens, and she listens to Emerys tell Fae stories. And this part never truly made sense to me, and it kind of does break my heart because Emerys and Luca have always been so kind to Celaena, like since she showed up, but she starts to put her walls up again. It might be the insecurity that she's struggling to shift. I'm not really sure what it is. She's not being as nice to them as she used to, which honestly, shame on her, but I also kind of understand. Flash forward to a day of training where Rowan asks her to shift. So Celaena says, okay, I'll shift, but I want to see you shift first. So he shifts into his majestic hawk form, and then he shifts back to Fae. And she's like, no, I'm still not shifting. And then they get into like a verbal spar again, because when are these guys not bickering realistically? But then he literally leans forward and bites her neck with his canines. First of all, ow. Second of all, she shifts because of it. Chapter 21, Prince Rowan is pretty proud of himself for making her shift, but she's obviously like ticked off because he just bit her. And this is where we get into the next big dilemma after Aelin learning how to shift on demand, is that she shifts and she immediately wants to shift back to her human form because that's her comfort zone. That's where she's been for the past, what, 10 plus years of her life. But instead she just like decides to stay Fae and like soak in all the Faeness, because like all of her senses are heightened, her body proportions are different, like everything about her feels different. But then things get kind of crazy because her power, which is fire, just starts going berserk. Thankfully though, and conveniently enough, Rowan's power is air, and so he's able to like engulf her flames and like blow them out. And then this part gets weird, and like these things, they're fine to read, but when you have to explain them out loud to someone else, it sounds really weird, so bear with me here. But he apologizes for biting her because apparently when he bit her, he could sense that she was already in a different committed relationship with Kale, and we both technically know that they're not really in a relationship. And then he also mentions how Fae are super territorial, and it's like super inappropriate and against Fae culture to like bite someone who is in a relationship with another person. Guys, it's like I said, it's very cringy, it's very weird, and it's uncomfy, and it's only fine if you don't think about it too much. So let's just stop talking about it. Anyway, so they go back to training, and his only assignment for her for the rest of the day is just to shift back and forth between her Fae and her human form. I don't remember off the top of my head because I didn't write it down in my outline, but I'll be really honest with you. Rowan and Aelin fight so much and bicker so much that I stopped writing what they were bickering and fighting about, because I can guarantee you 9 out of 10 it doesn't actually matter to the plot. But basically what comes out as a result of it is important. Basically Rowan, we find out, hates her because she is Aelin and she decided to become the most notorious assassin and just enjoy. He thinks she enjoyed it because she's kind of playing this role that she has no shame in what she did. His thing is that her people were defeated and they needed a leader then more than ever, and she decided to just run away, keep a secret identity, and just live a life as a notorious assassin. And then on top of that, she decided to serve the king, who is her enemy, and kill for him, even though we find out that she didn't actually kill for him. But his point is that she even entertained the idea of serving him in the first place. And he's basically saying that you have people who are in hiding waiting for a leader to rise, and you've been here this whole time just playing assassin. And I do see where he is coming from. Like, she did have a responsibility that she ran away from, but then at the same time she was like 10 years old, so it's hard to be mad at her, but he feels totally justified in hating her for not deciding to take up the throne at 10 years old. So Rowan's big issue here is why? Why all of a sudden are you now interested in finding these word keys and defeating the king, and you're not even talking about taking up your throne? If anything, you seem very adamant against taking up your throne. And this is where she reveals that she's not doing this to take back her throne, but to free the people of Eyllwe, because her friend Nehemia died and she was the princess of Eyllwe and she promised her that she would help free her people. Rowan doesn't see why that's her problem or even her priority at the time, but Aelin then shares, and I feel like this so perfectly encapsulates everything Aelin is struggling with right now. She basically says that When my people suffered, I ran away. Nehemia died for her people when they were suffering. So basically, she's realizing Nehemia is the princess she wishes she was. She gets very emotional. She doesn't want Rowan to see that he got to her emotionally. So she decides that she's leaving, but not to go back to Mistward. Like, she's just leaving Mistward. She's no longer doing the thing with Mob. And in my opinion, this doesn't necessarily fully make sense because she literally just gave her reason for wanting to find the word keys, and now she's throwing away that. But don't worry, there's the next chapter. Chapter 22. So Aelin sets up camp, she makes some makeshift weapons, and then on top of that she starts a fire. Later in the night she realizes the forest is really quiet, maybe too quiet, and then it occurs to her every single time that her and Rowan have set up camp, even from when he picked her up at the very beginning of this book in Wendelin, he has always told her not to start a fire or set a fire, despite the fact that she's always asked for it because she hates being cold. Same. So she realizes, oh, there might actually be a really good reason for that. So she starts to stump on the fire, but it is much too late because she can hear shrieking in the distance. Then lightning strikes in the distance, and she can see the outlines of long, lanky bodies. And she realizes that these are the skinwalkers that Rowan told her about. Skinwalkers are made up of sewn together human skin of their victims. So they like to hunt down beings, skin them, and then as a trophy, sew the skin to their body. So they smell like death and decay, and they probably look like everything from your worst nightmare. And I think I could show a picture of them, but I don't want to give you nightmares because I looked up fan art of skinwalkers from Throne of Glass and I was horrified. So if you're really curious, you really want a visual, you really want to know, you can look up skinwalkers, but this is going to stay blank. We're not going to be showing skinwalkers here. So she realizes that unless she starts running, her skin is going to be decorating these skinwalkers. So she decides to start booking it. And as she's running through the forest, Rowan grabs her and he's like, you're not going to make it in your human form. You need to shift right now or we're both going to die. So she shifts back into her fae form with a little bit of trouble, but she does it. And right after she shifts, Rowan basically informs her, hey, just a heads up, these people cannot be killed with mortal weapons. So our best bet is to outrun them. And something about crossing a river, I guess they can't go into the water, I don't know. So they run all the way and it's super high intensity, very dramatic, very creepy, but the skinwalkers are chasing them all the way there, but they do get to the river, they cross to the other side, and then Aelin decides now is a good time to experiment with her fire because although the skinwalkers can't be killed with a mortal weapon, technically because she's like an immortal creature, her power is immortal. So she's like, what if they could be killed with an immortal fire? So she releases like a blue wildfire at them and they disintegrate. They no longer exist. They are as dead can be. Because Homegirl just about started a forest fire, thankfully Rowan has very strong magic and he's able to like use his wind to put out the fire so that the forest was not harmed. And now this is where we're going to learn a little bit more about the magic system. I'm not going to pretend to have a full understanding of it, and in my opinion I don't even think the Fae have a full understanding of it except for this like well analogy. Actually, let's go with the battery analogy here. They talk about wells, but honestly battery helps. So if they rest, they can charge their battery to like 100%, but whenever they use their magic, they use up that battery. And now the part that I think really confuses people is that you'll often hear like they're reaching down to the bottom of their well. So think like small spurts of power can come from like the juice at the top of the battery. But if they're going to like be releasing a huge chunk of magic, the best way to do that is if they reach with their magic all the way to the bottom and they pull from the bottom. That is how I have visualized it, and that is what helps me truly understand the magic system. I hope that helps. If it doesn't, I'm sorry. That's the best I can do for you. Oh, also, you can die if you get your battery to 0%. I guess that's important. So because she hasn't used her magic, like, really ever, her battery does get spent pretty quickly and pretty easily. So she just released like wildfire, so that used a good bit of her battery, so she needs to rest now. So she shifts back into her human form and Rowan comes up to her and he's like, hey, so how come it was so easy for you to shift? And she gives him like a, oh, I don't really know, like whatever answer. But in reality, what we find out, Celaena, when it came to shifting for herself, noticed she ran away from them for a bit in her human form. But once Rowan was involved and Rowan wasn't going to leave her behind and she realized they were both going to die if she didn't shift, then it was easy for her to shift. So it's pretty much the concept of if it's going to endanger someone else, she can't let someone else be endangered by her incompetence, so then she's going to be able to shift. But she's not able to just shift for herself. Chapter 23, this is going to be in Manon's point of view, and today is the day. Today is selection day. Everyone's going to have like their own mount by the end of today. As we've talked before in part 1, she really wants Titus. She's already very possessive of him, but he's also the biggest, the baddest, and most brutal. So as you can imagine, a lot of other witches want Titus. And Manon's insane in all the best ways because she literally sharpens her talons because she said, I'm ready to throw hands, or in this case, throw claws if I need to get Titus. Because that's pretty much what it's going to come down to, is it's technically first come, first serve, but if multiple people want the same wyvern, they pretty much have to fight it out. They don't really go into very much what that looks like, but it's decided somehow. So all the wyverns are basically going into this pit, and all the witches are outside and on top, so the pit's like in the ground, and they're all standing in a ring like above this pit, watching as these wyverns are fighting bait beasts. Remember, those are the ones I told you that they're not really strong enough to be in battle, and they're also usually smaller as well. They're putting these little bait beasts in the pit, and then the ones that are actually up for auction or selection are being thrown in there, and they're basically brutalizing and torturing these little bait beasts. It's horrible. Just to like show off their skill to the witches and the witches to claim them. So it's Titus's turn and he gets a bait beast. And this is like a bigger bait beast, but Titus is a bigger wyvern, so it makes sense. So Petra actually doesn't want Titus. She wanted a different wyvern and she already got him. But Iskra wants Titus. So as Titus is out and he's showing off and he's like messing with the bait beast, Iskra's like, if you want him, Manon, you should go get him. And she pushes her into the pit. So now Manon is in a pit with Titus and this bait beast. It was in this moment she realizes Titus is gonna kill her. Like, she's looking at Titus being like, I claim you, you're mine. Like, she goes into this confident because her and Titus are practically soulmates, right? But Titus is not having it. He just sees her as like a meal. And this is where Manon's like, do I really want to go into battle with a beast that doesn't respect me? I don't know. It's kind of this whole like epiphany moment that she has, I guess. And so she decides like, if I want to get out of this alive, I need to fight my way out. So she's trying to get her way out of the pit. Titus is coming after her. And then she realizes that this bait beast has a lot more gall than some of the other bait beasts did. And this bait beast is actually fighting back. So she decides that her and this little bait beast are going to team up and fight Titus. As she's trying to fend for herself, the bait beast comes up and like rips Titus's throat out, using Manon as like a distraction to Titus. It's like this whole thing. But basically this tiny little bait beast killed Titus, like the wyvern that everyone wanted. So Manon looks at this little guy and he looks her right in the eyes, and she realizes that like she has a connection with this wyvern that she cannot explain, and against her better judgment she claims the bait beast as her mount. So flash forward, Iskra is whipped and punished obviously for shoving Manon into the pit, but Manon's also in trouble too because her grandmother matron's like, you ruined my plans. Like, I wanted you to be the wing leader, I wanted you to come out of this battle victorious, and then when we crowned a witch queen, I wanted it to be you. And you've ruined that all by picking a tiny little bait beast who can't even fly. So that's a fun fact. This thing cannot even fly yet. And it's in this moment where Manon's like, absolutely not. I'm gonna stick to my gut. I know that he can be the best wyvern out there for me, and I'm gonna train him. I'm gonna get him airborne, and we are going to be wing leader, and I'm gonna end up on the Iron Teeth throne by the end of this war. So how she's gonna do that, we're gonna find out. Hi, so it's actually an entirely different day. I needed to take a couple day break from the Throne of Glass series, and I actually ended up taking like a 1 week break from YouTube, but I'm back and I'm ready to go and I feel rejuvenated, and let's just kick off with chapter 24. I love you. I love you so much. Thank you. Alright, so chapter 24. This is Kale's POV. He takes Aedion to Celaena's old rooms and they go down to the tombs together. He also shows Aedion the Eye of Elena necklace and basically explains what it does, which we know it protects you from danger. Now, do you remember when I told you, I think back in part 1, that Dorian's new coping mechanism for all of his trauma is to just like explore and walk around the tombs at night? Well, he's down in the tombs and apparently he's been eavesdropping on this entire conversation. This is a big deal because if you think about it, Dorian knows nothing. And not only is he finding out that Celaena has magic, but Celaena is also Aelin Galathynius, is like sworn to be his biggest enemy. And then on top of that, Kale knows about magic that exists, which his father is in control of. It's like this whole thing because Dorian makes a noise or something and Aedion and Kale realize he's there and they basically are like, are you going to tell anyone? Because this is a big deal because Dorian could very well go back to his dad and tell his dad everything. And they're kind of in this situation where it's like, shoot, like what do we do? Thankfully, Dorian is not interested in telling his dad anything. He also kind of had like suspicions that his dad was just not a stand-up guy, but he's very, very, very upset at Kale, which honestly, totally justified. Like, I get Kale keeping it a secret from him, but I feel like it's gone too far without Dorian having a thorough understanding of what's going on. He should have heard about this a lot sooner than just now. But I will say something that I will give Kale bonus points for here is that Dorian basically asks Kale if he told Aedion about him, aka his magic, and he finds out that he did not tell Aedion. So Kale has not been honest with him, but he hasn't told anyone his secret, which is another thing where it's like, okay, bare minimum, but it's still appreciated. However, Dorian asking Kale if he told Aedion that he had magic was not subtle enough, and Aedion's like, if you're trying to ask him if he told me you had magic, no, he didn't, but I kind of figured it out on my own. But then the bigger question probably even then, if Dorian is gonna keep all this secret, which we learn that he is, the big question is Dorian gonna get involved? And Dorian beats them to the punch and he says, don't even think about it. Now we're gonna jump to Aedion's POV. Later that day, he's meeting with Ren and Murtaugh and basically confirms with them that they can trust Kale. That's kind of crazy to me because Aedion's been very not trusting, especially with Kale. So like, this is a big deal that he's like saying not only that he can trust him, but that they can trust him too. Ren and Murtaugh want to know where Aelin is because Aedion hasn't told them yet that he knows that she's in Wendelin. In my opinion, really smart of Aedion to do this. It occurs to him that they were with Archer Finn and Archer Finn was willing to let Nehemia die for their cause, even though she was literally like a princess of one of the continents, still giving the king pushback. So Aedion's like, you know what? I'm not going to tell them where Aelin is for now. And I do think that's really, really smart. So then they start discussing everyone who survived the attack on Terrasen because they all like scattered to the winds, but there are people out there who still exist. One specifically that they discuss in this conversation is a girl named Alide. Alide is the daughter of a woman who we will find out more about later, but Alide escaped. We don't know where she went, we don't know where she is, but we know that she at least survived the attack on Terrasen. Remember that name, remember that name, remember that name, do not forget that name. We also learned that not only was Aedion selected to be Aelin's sword and sworn protector, but he was also supposed to be the one person who took Aelin's blood oath, which is a very big deal in Fae culture. But honestly, we're gonna have to like discuss that more later, but it is like a very, very big deal. Aedion is supposed to take the blood oath from Aelin. Chapter 25, Rowan and Celaena POV. Training's not going very well because she's still like not fully in control of her shift. And even when she does manage to shift, her magic just goes haywire. So they come across Mala's temple, which I guess Rowan thinks that being there is going to help her like tap into her magic better. But in reality, it just makes her more jumpy because let's just say that her family history is a little bit tricky. Here's one of those conversations where I think the author just put it in to kind of quiet people who were claiming there were plot holes in the first couple books. In my opinion, it doesn't really play to the plot, but she basically does answer why did the humans beat the Fae when Aderlin invaded Terrasen, which rightfully so. It's like, okay, how did that happen? It doesn't seem realistic as far as a fantasy book is concerned, but basically Rowan says that magic disappeared before the attack on Terrasen, and apparently the Fae of Terrasen relied way too heavily on their magic, so that when they didn't have their magic, they didn't really know how to tap into their raw and natural Fae power, and that's why they were conquered by Aderlin. So in case that was something that was bothering you or you were wondering about, there you go. We also learned that Maeve did not help, but she did offer sanctuary to any of the Fae who could make it to Dornael from Terrasen, and she would give them sanctuary, but she didn't actually help or assist at all in the attack on Terrasen. So they're walking through the woods and they find a body. Plot twist, right? Or at least what's left of a body. She looks like she's had the life sucked out of her, is the words that are used. And they realize that the scent on the body matches the scent of like that freakish being that was in the cemetery that attacked Celaena. And now we get murder mystery solving Rowan and Celaena, which in my opinion is like such a fun side quest for them to go on, but I really enjoy it. And it does kind of add like a fun bit of flavor to the book. So they study and analyze the scene, and it's time to head back before it gets dark. But Celaena refuses to leave until they bury the body, and surprisingly, Rowan respects that decision and he lets her do it. Chapter 26, we're gonna start in Kale's POV. Kale hears a rumor that Dorian is seeing someone, and Kale's actually really happy for him because he's like, you know what, he deserves a little bit of happiness, even if it seems foolish that it's not gonna work out. Like, good for him that he's at least like making the most of a dark time in his life. And like, true. Okay, now also fun fact, Celaena had a secret apartment for when she was an assassin, like pre-end-of-year salt mine camp days, but like when she left the Assassin's Keep. So there's like a tiny gap of time there that we're gonna talk about in Assassin's Blade. She like bought an actual apartment and lived in an apartment for a little bit. And do you remember in book 2, Celaena had a will that Kale found, and she left everything to Kale, and she told him that like even though she hates his guts that she wasn't gonna take him out of her will. Well, apparently she left this apartment to Kale in her will, and that's where he wants to meet Aedion. So that's like their new secret meeting spot that's not like the rebel building, because if you think about it, it's really careless for them to keep meeting there. So Kale's waiting for Aedion in this apartment, and he starts thinking about Arobynn Hommel and how much he hates him, and how much he's like, you know what, if I ever saw Arobynn on the street, I might not be able to resist unaliving him on the spot. But he also thankfully does recognize that that's kind of Aelin's call, what happens to him, and so he's gonna let Celaena have her way with Arobynn whenever she feels like it's a good time. But then he's also surprised that she hasn't tried to get even with him yet. Aedion shows up. We're actually going to jump to Aedion's POV because he's looking around at everything and he's getting very overwhelmed. He has basically been punishing himself for the past 10 years for losing Aelin that day that Terrasen was attacked by serving the king, which if you ask me, I don't see how that's helping anything, if not making it worse, but I guess that's the point. That was him punishing himself by serving the man that he hated. To each their own and how they grieve, but to me that just seems like a really unhealthy way, an almost unlogical way to grieve, but okay. Basically, he's realizing as he's looking around this room that nothing is ever going to separate him from Aelin again when he finds her. So he's like, I need to find her and get her back, and I'm never letting her out of my sight again. A little, and by little I mean a lot, of territorialness and hyper protectiveness going on here. You'll learn that about Aedion very quickly. He's very possessive of Aelin, and obviously we know Celaena very well, and we, as you can probably guess, she doesn't really handle people feeling possessive over her very well. So you'll see how that plays out, but it's worded very strongly, and I think that's very intentional by Sarah J. Maas in this moment to show you, like, he's almost like unhealthily obsessed with keeping Celaena safe. or Aelin safe. As you remember, one of Kale's 3 goals before he moves back to Aniel with his father is he wants to find out how magic disappeared and how the rebels plan to get it back, because he's heard that rumor. Well, Aedion shares with him that he does have an inkling of why magic disappeared, and he basically lays out a map for him and talks about birds. And this is really confusing to me. It's very interesting. Kale is very annoyed with how vague he is, but Aedion's basically like, well, I'm not going to give you all the information up front. Like, I'll give you bit by bit, and as I trust you, I'll give you more. Basically says that due to the flying pattern of certain birds from certain regions, they believe that there's definite lines where magic starts and stops. I'm not sure if he states in this chapter, but a couple chapters later, he will definitely state that they think it's like a triangle, like somewhere, and he won't point on the maps where, and I think that's what makes Kale so upset, is he's like not really giving him any information, but he's basically like, I don't know what's maybe like the beacon, but for some reason there's 3 points somewhere on the continent, and anything between these 3 points within this triangle does not have any magic. And Kale, of course, is annoyed because he's basically told Aedion everything, and he's held no cards to his chest whatsoever, but Aedion's being smarter than him, and that bothers Kale. So they're basically just bonded over like the same convictions, but they definitely don't have the same end goal per se. Honestly, I don't even think Kale knows what Kale wants at this point, so I can't really speak for him, but I definitely don't think that Kale wants what Aedion wants. It does seem kind of contradictory because although Aedion just told Ren and Murtaugh that they can trust Kale, Aedion, I think he's pulling back a little bit on that, because it's occurring to him like this man has been blindly loyal to the king for years, and all of a sudden he's had a change of heart because of Celaena, but at the same time, like, what if his feelings for Celaena leave? Like, is this really his values, or is this just like a, I don't know what to do, I'm doing what I think is right? Because if that's the case, then Kale could turn on them on a dime. On another point entirely, Aedion basically tells Kale like, hey, I know Dorian says he wants no part in it, and I know you don't want Dorian to have a part in this, but we might need him to play a part in this. And Kale refuses to even entertain the idea. He's like, no. Speaking of Dorian, let's jump to his POV, because he's been spending basically every single day with Sorsha, and he like keeps finding excuses. Honestly, it's almost concerning how often Dorian is like inflicting pain on himself just so he can summon Sorsha to his room so they can spend a couple minutes together. But she has been helping him research magic and then coming to him on those evenings with more information. And she thinks she's found a way to help him stabilize his magic, and that is iron. So obviously there's iron in our bloodstream, and Dorian thinks that's because the gods are trying to control magical beings from being too powerful. She's like, I have anemic patients who I give iron supplements to. She's like, what if we create like an iron supplement or like a iron elixir that has a lot of iron in it, and then you just take that and it will help you kind of suppress your magic. And Dorian's like, yeah, sounds great, let's do it. So he takes the supplements. I think he ends up taking elixir daily following this event, but like for the first night he takes the supplements because that's what she has on hand, and he starts to think about things that make him really upset and emotional because that's how his magic is triggered. And he basically does like have like a moment where he's like spiraling because he's thinking a little too hard about things that make him emotional, and he's basically thinking about the betrayal of Kale not telling him everything and how chaotic things would have been if him and Celaena did end up dating for real, because remember, they were romantically involved for a bit there. Can you imagine if they were like seriously dating and he found out she was Aelin Galathynius? Like, that would have been catastrophic. So he's thinking about all these things. He's thinking about how horrible of a person his father is. He's thinking about the throne he might inherit. He's thinking about the fact that he's inheriting a throne means that he couldn't be with Sorsha. And he has this moment where he like feels the magic release. Like he gets to that point, but then no magic actually releases. So the iron supplements work. And he's so thrilled and so happy that he just grabs Sorsha and plants one on her. And they kiss, and it's perfect, and I love it. It's honestly one of the cutest moments in the entire book. Chapter 27, Manon's POV. So Manon's on her way to visit Abraxos because she still has to train with him separately until he can learn how to fly. She has Astrid, her second, and her cousin summon the 13 and train together without her. And this is where Astrid actually reveals that the Blackbeak matron has been asking Astrid to spy on Manon to not let her train Abraxos alone, because at this point the matron is really just trying to humiliate Manon and punish her for what she thinks to be a really unwise decision. And so she wants Manon to like face the consequences, but Manon's like, no, I'm gonna train Abraxos alone. I'm going to make sure that he's ready so that when I fly with you guys, I can actually take my place as Coven leader like I'm meant to. Thankfully, we love Astrid. Astrid's amazing. And she's like, you know what? Like, I'd rather be a good second than a good spy. Best answer, if you ask me. So Manon is walking to where Abraxos is kept, and she's thinking about how weird the place smells again. Guys, I know I keep bringing this up, but I need you to focus on it. Especially for those of you who are reading along with these videos. By the way, I love that you guys do that. The amount of DMs and comments that I've gotten saying that you guys are reading the books for the first time along with these videos makes my heart so happy. Obviously, I feel like it's come up like 5 or 6 times, but I feel like those kinds of details are so easy to skim over, especially in the witch chapters, because if you're a first time reader, chances are the witch chapters are kind of annoying to you. So you're gonna skim right over it, but I beg you not to, especially not this detail. Anyways, she's talking about how the guards are also acting more strange on top of smelling more strange. Then on top of that, she noticed that the number of guards is dwindling. None of this is sitting right with her. We do find out later that some of the witches are like luring and seducing some of the guards away and then killing them and like drinking their blood, because that's what witches do. It's not really relevant to the story. I think we find out in like a chapter. Anyway, so there's something else. So she's going to get Abraxos, and then one of the wyvern trainers comes up and basically tells her like, hey, he's not fit for battle and he's also not fit for flying, so you're better off just picking a different mount. They basically get in this verbal battle because Manon's like, how dare you like insinuate that I made the wrong decision? And he's starting to get really aggravated, and one of his hands gets a little too close for Manon, so she decides that she's going to teach him a lesson. She goes to like smack his hand away, but girl has iron claws, so she like gashes his hand. In the sickest intimidation tactic ever, she goes to like lick the blood off her nails in front of him to like basically remind him that she's a lethal weapon and he should not be getting in her face about these kinds of things. But as she's walking away, she's like, okay, that was not human blood. Like, that blood tastes weird, and on top of that, it's not even a normal red color. If this seems fishy to you, it's because it is. Like, we've seen 10 red flags now about weird stuff going on in the North Fang Mountains. Anyway, so she gets to Abraxos' pen and she starts talking to him, and basically she's like, I'm your master. You're my mount. I'm the greatest in my coven, so you need to be the greatest in our coven. And he seems to actually respond to this in understanding. A lot of the wyvern trainers keep telling them that they don't understand any more than dogs do, and in my opinion, I think dogs understand way more than we give them credit for. Manon is like, no, Abraxos is a very intelligent beast. So she turns to the trainers because she basically found out that the way that they've been training him has been to quite literally like beat it out of him. So they've basically been abusing Abraxos, and she turns to him and she's like, if you guys bring another whip near my mount, you're dead. So thankfully we've put an end to that, and she basically sends them away. And so when they leave and it's just her and him in the pen, Abraxos actually really chills out. So she's able to put a saddle on him and assess some of his injuries, and then she lets the people in charge of preparing him for battle know, like, okay, here are the changes I want made to him, here's like what I want his armor to look like, blah 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 blah. And now that he trusts her, she's been able to train with him a little bit, but they're still not quite airborne. Anyways, we'll get back to that in a bit, but we're actually going to flash forward to Manon goes up to Sorrel. Sorrel is her third, so basically the one underneath Astrid. Actually, wait, I wrote it down because I thought this is really cool. Okay, so this is how they describe the personalities, and I honestly think this is perfect. Manon is ice, Asterin is fire, and Sorrel is the rock. I think that is quite literally the best way to describe these three witches' personalities. So yeah, if that helps you in any way define Sorrel in your brain, I think that's perfect. Anyway, so Sorrel is basically overseeing the training of some of the younger witches and like some of the, obviously like the 13 is a coven, but the Blackbeaks have multiple covens, and it's basically the youngest coven, and apparently the leader is super weak. Manon basically says it's unacceptable because apparently there's going to be a war games that's going to basically help the king and the matron witches decide which clan is going to be leading the war effort, and Manon's like, we're only as strong as our weakest coven, so either this coven leader needs to get her act together or she's gone. So yeah, very cutthroat environment if you ask me. And then Manon tells them that Abraxos is going to be airborne by next week. Internally, she knew it was a lie, and based off Sorrel's reaction, Sorrel knew it was a lie too. So we're just gonna have to wait and see how that goes. I'm very excited about chapter 28 because this is the first Rowan POV that we get ever. So they're going on a field trip, but the location is 20 miles away, and he informs Aelin that they will be running both ways, and he wants to spend a good bit of the day there, so she needs to shift. He also lets her know that he's noticed that every single time that she's been able to shift, it's because that she's been very angry and frustrated in the moment, and that she's had to go to a very dark place. And he's like, you know what, that works for now, but maybe in the future we shouldn't need to make you a rageful, angry person in order to shift, so maybe we should work on that. So he tries to channel her anger by fighting her because he knows that she can't handle the fact that he's stronger and faster than her, and sure enough, it works, and she shifts. So they're able to run to this village. And in my opinion, this is honestly one of the sweetest, most underestimated scenes in this entire book, but they're basically like running through the woods together at like Fae speed. And she talks about like how freeing it feels and how she's enjoying testing the limits of her Fae body. And it feels like the first time where we see Aelin actually loving being a Fae. And there's even a moment, because we jumped to Aelin's POV for this part, where out of the corner of her eye, she can see that Rowan is smiling. Like he's genuinely enjoying like just like sprinting through the woods with her. So like they have this little bonding moment, I guess. And it's also, I think, a very healing moment for Aelin to not hate her Fae body. It's very beautiful, it's very emotional. And of course 20 miles goes by way too fast, obviously at the speed that they're running for sure, but then also like they were just having a lot of fun. So she's like, oh, I can't wait till we have to run back, you know, it's cute. So he gives her a change of clothes so that they can blend in. And so they change and they go into the village, and the people are being very cagey and hardly talking to them. So Celaena's like, hey, what's going on here? So Rowan actually shares that the humans near Dorian and Aelin hate the Fae. It explains why they needed the clothes to look a little more human, but basically we learn a little more politics about how Maeve ran her kingdom. And Rowan tells Celaena all this in a very politically correct way, because mind you, he services right under Queen Maeve, so he does need to not sound like he's been critical of her at all. I'm gonna sound a little more critical because I am, but Fae stole and plundered and basically took advantage of the human for years, and it went unchecked for a really, really long time. It wasn't until fairly recently that Maeve decided to get it under control, and it's actually Rowan's job and the other men that Rowan works with to enforce this, but at the same time, like, stuff still happens because it's just like, you know, culture struggling to catch up. And Celaena realizes like, oh, we just need to buy some stuff, and he's like, wait, what? So she like grabs his money, I guess, and she goes into a sweet shop, because in my opinion, if I had cash and I'm in a village and I see a sweet shop, that's also where I'm spending my money first. So she goes and she buys a bunch of these really nice chocolates, and they go to a couple other stores and buy a couple other things, and all the people in the village are like, oh, they're here to buy stuff, and they have a good bit of money because I guess Rowan gets paid well for his job. So they're buying stuff. So naturally all the sellers in the village are like trying to lure them in, and of course now they're very willing to talk with them about stuff. So they don't like obviously solve the murder talking to these people, but I do I guess they get a bit more information that kind of helps them like get a fuller picture of what's going on. And they just get a little bit more insight. And now it's time to head back at the end of the day. So they get back to Mistward and Aelin falls asleep and she starts to have a dream of her mother. Now she's actually, this is more of a memory than a dream. She's actually remembering something that did happen. One tidbit here that I think is really precious is that we find out that Aelin's mother called her Fireheart, and I think that's a really sweet nickname. So if you watch like Throne of Glass TikToks or something and someone says Fireheart, like they're talking about Aelin, so the more you know. But she remembers her and her father having an argument that her magic was out of check because apparently she was in a library and she like caught a bunch of books on fire in the royal library, and they're also concerned that she has no friends except for Aedion, her cousin. We also get a cute little peek into like Aedion and Aelin when they were kids, and basically like they were each other's best friends, but also we find out Aelin was a big reader, so all of her best friends were either characters in books or Aedion. Her parents basically find out that Aelin and Aedion were overhearing the conversation, and they said, you know what, it's late, like we'll talk about this tomorrow. But that's actually the night that Terrasen invades and the night that her parents are brutally murdered. So she actually never got to have that conversation with them. And that was like her last memory of her parents. Chapter 29, we are in Sorsha's POV. So we ended on a sad note and now we're gonna go to a happy note because she cannot stop thinking about that kiss, and girl, me neither. Love anything Sorsha Dorian. Like it literally warms my heart so much. Anyway, so she's been coming to his rooms every single day to give him his iron dosage for the day. And he does seem on edge because he doesn't really understand why she's helping him. Like for some reason, Dorian's all of a sudden getting really skeptical about why Sorsha's helping him so much, because not only would he get killed if people found out about his magic, but she would get killed too for not only knowing about it, but trying to help him hide it. And she basically just says, I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. And that's the only answer she'll give him. And he realizes like, oh, I've not been able to trust anyone in my life, but maybe Sorsha's just like a really good person. I'm not crying. I'm not crying. I'm not crying. You know how I said this was a happier chapter? Maybe it's not. Maybe I'm gonna cry here too. Back to Sorsha's POV. She is struggling because she loves Dorian, she really does, but obviously nothing could ever happen between a healer and the prince. But she decides that, you know what, I never do anything for myself, and frankly, I don't care that he's the prince. So she turns back around, because I guess she was about to leave his rooms, and she grabs him and she plants one on him and she kisses him, basically to let him know like, hey, I know you kissed me last night and I didn't really reciprocate it, so you were probably confused about whether or not I actually wanted that, but yeah, I want this. And thus Sorshan, or Dorsha, whichever you prefer, they become like an official thing. We're gonna jump to Kale's POV because he's about to meet Ren, Murtaugh, and Aedion, and he is having a lot of guilt for being a traitor. This is exactly what Aedion was afraid of. Remember, he's like, he's always been so loyal to the king, and now he's had this change of heart. Like, what if he has another change of heart? Kale is really struggling with being a traitor, so this is exactly what Aedion was nervous about. This starts a very long string of contradicting emotions for Kale, and we'll develop that for a while, but this is kind of where it first starts to like really haunt him. Aedion doesn't understand why Kale's so on edge and in a rush, so Kale actually opens up to Aedion about his deal with his dad about leaving in 3 months, and this earns Aedion's respect, I guess. And they're basically making fun of how horrible Kale's dad is, and Kale's like, all right, enough crap on my dad, like how sucky's your dad? And Aedion basically reveals that he has no clue who his dad is. His mother, who's now dead, she always told him like that out of protection for him, she was never going to tell him who his father was. So whoever his dad is, it's dangerous for him to know him. Anyway, so Ren comes around the corner, I guess, for wherever they were waiting to meet up. He's in a panic because there were guards waiting for him and now he's wounded. And Murtaugh's like basically practically carrying him because his middle was basically sliced and he's basically trying to keep his organs from falling out at this point. Sorry to get a little too graphic for you. Trust me, I'm way less graphic than the book is. They basically decide to hide because Aedion whips out his sword and he's like, I've got this. And this is the first time we see Aedion fight. And basically Kale describes it as the same exact style and brutality. Like, he's never seen anyone except for Aelin fight like that. So yeah, he's really good. Like, scary good. And in a matter of minutes, he drops 6 guards to the ground, and he doesn't have a single scratch on him. So Kale goes to inspect the bodies because he's assuming they're his men, right? They're not. These are guards who you would assume work for the king, but they're not wearing like your usual kingdom guard uniform. They're wearing black uniforms with a wyvern on them. Remember that. Chapter 30, we're still in Aedion and Kale's POV. They basically run to an opium den because Ren points it out and says that they can hide there. They basically run in, and the lady working at the opium den knows Ren apparently very well. They all pretend to be drug addicts so that when the other guards run in to try to like find the people who just killed 6 guards, they overlook Ren and Murtaugh and Aedion and Kale. So they move and leave, and Kale's like, you know what, we're gonna address the fact that Ren is a regular here later, but right now we just need to make sure he gets out of this alive. So the guards leave, and the lady who's running this den, she does have stuff for Ren, I guess, and so they're able to treat him. He's gonna be fine, but recovery is gonna be a nightmare, that's all you know. Kale basically asks, all right, where's your home? Like, we can make sure you guys get back there safely. And we basically find out that Ren and Murtaugh have been homeless this entire time. They haven't been staying anywhere. Like, they've just been hopping place to place, day to day, and night to night. And so Kale offers them an apartment, and he's just basically like, hey, I have an apartment, I'm not using it, you guys can stay there. He doesn't tell them it's Aelin's apartment, but it's Aelin's apartment. We finally get to why we met up in the first place, which is the 3 beacons that are keeping magic out. Honestly, it's kind of weird because there's not really anything else discovered at the end of this chapter, so I don't know why it needed its own meeting, but basically they are like, we need to find out what the beacon is and destroy it. I think actually in this moment they do have 2 like general locations they think 2 of the beacons are at, but they don't know the 3rd location. And then on top of that, they don't know what these beacons look like or if they're even something physical at all, so they need to figure out what the beacon is so they can destroy it. Chapter 31, this is Manon's POV because Abraxos is still not flying yet. This is also where we find out that Abraxos is refusing to eat meat. So Manon at first is like, are you a vegetarian? Like, what's going on here? Basically realizes he seems like afraid of the meat, so she goes to take a bite of it herself. She just goes to take a bite of raw dead goat. That kind of grosses me out a little bit, but she's not human, so I guess she won't get salmonella from that. But she takes a bite of this goat and then she spits it out because it tastes the same way that the blood of the guard tasted. And on top of that, it also smells like the guard smell. Guys, are you catching a weird pattern here? You should be. So basically she's like, okay, this is unacceptable. So she takes him out and she hunts down a goat with her bare hands and kills it, gives it to Abraxos, and he eats it. So the issue is really the meat that's being provided by the king's men. So the matron is beyond angry, and this is where we learn that Manon came to see Abraxos today because she has 24 hours before Abraxos has to be airborne, or she's getting kicked out of the clan. So she's like, okay, this is no longer optional. So she somehow wrestles him into a saddle and he's trying to buck her off. Like, it's a whole thing. She, mind you, in order to try to get him to fly, she like took him out to a field. And mind you, they're in the mountains, so it's basically like a cliff's edge. And as he's bucking her off, he loses sense of where the edge is and then missteps and falls down the side of a mountain. Chapter 32, Abraxos and Manon are falling down the side of a mountain in a dead drop. And basically they're going to die, and it's like this really big intense moment, and Manon basically just keeps screaming at Abraxos to like kick his wings out. So of course, as it always happens in the movies, so I'm sure you can imagine it, he like flings out his wings in the last second before they hit the ground, and he's able to get the wind from under him and fly. And it is actually a really beautiful and sweet moment because Abraxos has experienced flying freely for the first time in his life, and same with Manon. She hasn't flown on a wyvern before, so they kind of have their like Harry Potter and Hedwig moment, and they're just enjoying flying together. So Abraxos is officially ready to fly with the rest of the 13 coven. So flash forward to the next morning, Manon lets her 13 know that Abraxos is airborne, and now they're officially going to train together, but she wants the 13 to train together privately, always train together, never train with any of the other covens because they are going to land on top. A lot of this also stems from her distrust in the king's men, so she's like, whatever happens, like, we do not get separated. Chapter 33, we're gonna jump to Celaena's POV, because instead of shift, her new command has been to control her magic. And the recent torture that Rowan's putting her through is forcing her to light a candle, because that has to take a lot of control just to have one tiny flame, because her thing is whenever she uses her fire magic, she basically explodes a bunch of blue wildfire and practically wipes out anything within a couple feet radius of her. Lighting a candle is proving very challenging for Celaena. So every night after training, she eats some food in the back of the kitchens and listens to some of the campfire stories that are told. And every night she can see Rowan in his hawk form sitting in the window, also privately listening to the stories. One night she decides to speak up when Emrys is taking story suggestions, and she asks if he has any stories about Maeve. He says that he does know a lot and basically says, what do you want to know? And she says, tell me everything. I want to know everything. Like, tell me her history, tell me everything about how she got to where she is today. And so Emrys decides to start at the beginning. And mind you, this is like pages of information, so you're welcome for the summary. Long ago, when there was no mortal king on Wendellin's throne, the fairies still walked among us. Some were good and fair, some were prone to little mischiefs, and some were fouler and darker than the blackest night. But they were all ruled by Maeve and her two sisters, whom they called Mora and Mab. Cunning Mora, who bore the shape of a great hawk, aka Rowan's bloodline, and fair Mab, who bore the shape of a swan, and the dark mauve, whose wildness could not be contained by any single form. So we just learned that Maeve does not have an animal form. Interesting. I actually did not catch that the first time I read the book, so the fact that I caught that this time was like kind of crazy for me. Emrys recited the history, much of which Celaena knew. Mora and Mab had fallen in love with human men and yielded their immortality. Some said Maeve forced them to give up their gift of eternal life as punishment for marrying immortal men. Some said that they wanted to, if only to escape their sister Maeve. Celaena then asks if Maeve ever had a mate. And apparently there's this rumor that she did love a warrior, but he died in battle, and that's basically why she surrounds herself with the best fae warriors out there, like Rowan. So Emrys tells them stories late into the night about Maeve, and then through the window, Celaena sees a mountain cat walking up to Mistward, and this thing is like capable of unaliving some people. Like, this is a very intimidating animal, and she's like freaking out that it's approaching Mistward, but then it shifts into a fae, and then Rowan shifts from a hawk into a fae as well and goes to talk to this man. So Celaena shifts to her fae form so that she can overhear the conversation with her fae hearing, and basically learns that this fae's name is Gavriel. And he's basically been looking for Rowan for weeks because something very upsetting has happened, but we're not quite sure what that is because they end up walking into Mistward and going to Rowan's rooms, so they're no longer in earshot. Celaena, whether it's out of actually trying to be a good friend or because she's nosy, or both frankly, is not really certain, but she does get like some soup and bread and decides to take them to Rowan's rooms for his friend Gavriel, thinking that he may need it because he seemed like he was very distressed. And she walks in and Gavriel is laying shirtless on Rowan's table, and Rowan is bent over him, giving him a tattoo. Rowan is ticked off about this intrusion by Celaena and basically like chews her out. She apologizes and leaves, and honestly she feels stupid in this moment because she was expecting Rowan to think that she was being thoughtful and helpful, so him being mad at her actually makes her mad. So she goes to leave to go back to her rooms, but Rowan storms out of his rooms and basically follows her to chew her out and basically tells her that we're not friends and my life is none of your business. Like, I don't know why you think we're friends, but we're not. Like, I'm here to train you and that's it. And basically he says, I don't care about you, so I would prefer that you don't care about me. And something about that just rips my heart out just a little bit. Chapter 34, we are still in Celaena's POV, and she is doing her kitchen duties in the morning. And Emrys is showing her a dagger or knife that his mate had bought him, and Celaena freaks out because Honestly, I've never fully understood why this is a big deal, but apparently it's like an eelway knife, and she's able to tell that by looking at it. This causes her to have a meltdown because it makes her think about Nehemia, and she lashes out at Emerys. In my opinion, I know she's going through a lot, but this to me makes no sense, and it's inexcusable. But she lashes out at Emerys, but Luca and Emerys's mate Malachi go to defend Emerys and basically like tell Celaena, like, if you're gonna act like that, go away, like leave. He doesn't deserve this. And so Celaena does leave. And when Rowan goes down to the kitchens to pick up Celaena, obviously she's not there because she's basically been kicked out. Emerys, in pure gutsy fashion, chews out Rowan, basically says, we know who she is, apparently Evelyn, and Evelyn is Aelin's mother. Evelyn was at Mistward for years before going to Terrasen and taking up her place as royalty there. And he basically says, like, this girl needs comfort and she needs help and she's been through some serious stuff and she needs support right now and she needs a friend, not someone who's gonna drill sergeant her and yell at her and basically ignore all the trauma she's been through. I love Emerys for this because he has every reason to be mad at her, but he just basically went to bat for her with probably the most intimidating fae he will ever meet. Sorry, I get very passionate about this moment because I think it's really underestimated. Rowan goes outside to find Celaena, and of course she's crying, so he goes to sit with her and asks her, like, do you want to talk about it? And she says no, and he says thank goodness. He's like, I have an idea for training today. So he takes her to a cave, and apparently Celaena refers to this as a cave of nightmares, and there's a lake in this cave and it's frozen over, and guess who is sitting wrapped in chains in the middle of a frozen lake? Luca. How Luca got from the kitchens to this cave in this time, I'm not really sure, but it happens. Don't question it. And Rowan just basically says, okay, go get him. So basically she needs to be in her fae form in order to like get to him and be able to hear the cracks in the ice and like navigate to him safely. But at the same time, she can't lose control of her magic because she would then melt the ice and her and Luca would fall into this frozen pond. First of all, she's ticked at Rowan, so she chews him out. But then she starts to cross the ice and it's growing and crackling all the way, but she did shift into her fae form, so she's able to like navigate her way through the ice, and she does get to Luca. But as she starts to try to help him take the chains off, he starts talking about how the cave smells funny to him. Interesting, huh? Very interesting. And she can see that there's like waves of water under the ice, so she's realizing that Rowan is using his ice and wind magic to freeze over the river, because if there's a strong current in the water, it's not going to freeze over like this. So she thinks that's very interesting, and she kind of takes a mental note to also just rip him to shreds after this. So she gets all the chains off Luca. They start to walk back, and then she sees something moving under the ice, and she looks down and she sees a pair of red eyes looking up at her through the ice. Chapter 34. She sees these red eyes, and then she sees teeth, and she screams at Luca to run. He starts running back to the shore. She basically says it's something between a wyvern and a fish. So basically think like a demonic shark. Like that's kind of what I'm envisioning here. And even Rowan is yelling at her to run. So this is no longer a part of her training. So the thing shoots up through the ice to try to like snatch Aelin in its teeth, and it does miss her, but because of like the trajectory of him breaking the ice, it like shoots Celaena across the ice. She's trying to control her emotions, because if she freaks out and loses control of her magic, she's gonna melt the ice, and then they're all gonna be stuck in the water right now. The ice is the only thing keeping her and this monster separated. So Rowan takes a sword that suspiciously he happens to find in the cave in that very moment. Interesting. And slides it across the ice to her to basically have a way to defend herself. So she takes the scabbard, puts it on her, and she takes the sword out of it. But when she does, apparently there's like a ring that was in the scabbard, a gold ring. So she decides to pocket it. She takes out the sword, and she does end up making it to the shore. She doesn't need to use it. She doesn't need to fight the monster with it. And they basically, the three of them, book it out of that cave as fast as humanly possible. They do make it out in time, and they notice that the creature, although it got out of the water and it was able to crawl towards the mouth of the cave, it isn't able to actually leave the cave. So that's very interesting. And it basically just like roars a roar of defeat, whatever that may sound like. You can use your imagination there, and they're safe. So they head back to Mistward. She basically gives Rowan the scolding of his life, because not only did she almost die, but Luca, a sweet little half-fae boy, almost died because of his training methods. So she gets in a couple good hints, and basically Rowan lets her, but then he throws her to the ground and pins her down. And she says, look, I'll go through whatever crazy training methods that you want to do. She's like, but you are not allowed to include anyone else. No one else is going to get hurt because of my inability to use magic. And Rowan's basically like, why? So she says, I told her I would not help her, so she orchestrated her own death, because she thought that her death would spur me into action. She thought I could somehow do more than her, that she was worth more dead, and she lied about everything. She lied to me because I was a coward, and I hate her for it. I hate her for leaving me. Please don't bring anyone else into it. I will do anything you ask of me, but that is my line, anything else but that. So basically, because Nehemia sacrificed herself for the sake of Aelin tapping into her power, she doesn't want anyone else to die for the sake of Aelin learning how to use her power. So Rowan asks, how did she die? And Aelin shares she manipulated a mutual acquaintance into thinking that he needed to kill her in order to further his agenda. He hired an assassin and made sure I wasn't around and had her murdered. And then when Rowan asks her what happened to these two men, she says, the assassin I hunt down and I left in pieces in an alleyway. And the man who hired him, I gutted him and dumped his body into the sewer. And Rowan just says, good. Bonding moment, I guess? And then she informs him like, hey, you know that sword that you found in the cave and then slid towards me? Perfect timing. For some reason, I'm not going to ask you about that. I'm just going to let you know that I'm keeping the sword. And surprisingly, he doesn't fight her on it. He lets her keep it. So they go back inside to eat and clean up, and basically Emerys is mortified that her and Rowan and Luca look as disheveled as they do, but he decides not to ask any questions. Then Emerys leans over to Celaena and congratulates her for getting a couple punches in on Rowan, because I guess he has some bruises. After they finish eating, Aelin goes to do the dishes, because that's like her job, and Rowan goes over and helps her do the dishes. Something about that's just cute. I don't know. So Aelin asks if Emerys knows any story about the Bald Mountains, because apparently that's where they just were when they saw the creature. So fun fact, my camera just died and I have like less than a minute or two left, and I don't feel like charging my battery for 2 hours just to film this last little portion. So we're doing this on iPhone quality, so bear with me here. So she asks for stories about the Bald Mountain, and it's kind of a long story, but basically the lore is that the creature slipped in from another world while the gods were looking the other way, and he wanted to feast on humans and fae, but a fae warrior found him and fought him and cursed him to be stuck in that cave. It was so long ago that the name of this creature has actually been lost even in the lore. The only detail that's really like carried out through history that all the storytellers remember is that the fae warrior was remembered for a gold ring. What did Aelin find when she pulled this sword that Rowan found out of its scabbard? A golden ring. So it's occurred to Aelin that she thinks that this is the golden ring of that fae warrior, and she thinks that this sword is also belonging to that fae warrior. So anyway, she cannot sleep later that night because she actually feels really bad. When her and Rowan got in a fight, like, yeah, she got a couple hits in, but apparently she also activated her fire magic, and so she left like some handprints on him and like burns. So she decides to go and apologize to Rowan. This is also where we learn that through Mab, apparently Aelin has a little bit of healing power in her blood, but since queens were never healers, she was never even taught how to tap into that magic. So Rowan's like, maybe that's a problem we can tackle another day. So promise for future? Interesting. But then he dismisses her help and saying like, well, you don't have your healing power, so I'll just see you for training in the morning. As she's walking out, he stops her and he says, wait, I want to tell you a story. And he tells her the story of his mate who was killed, specifically 204 years and 27 days ago. And basically points out that the tattoo in the fae language that's all over his body is detailing the story of her death. He makes tattoos that share the stories of grief, and that's why fae, like Gavriel, whenever something traumatic happens to them, they ask Rowan to add it to their tattoo of the story of their grief. And apparently Gavriel just lost some men and he blames himself for it, so he wanted the story of what happened tattooed on his body. So Rowan tattoos it on himself, and he also tattoos his grief on other people's bodies too. I guess that's like his side hobby. But as for the story of his mate, because this is really important, he shares that he blames himself for her death. Her name was Lyria, and she was pregnant, which is super rare with the Fae. But he was called to fight in a war, and Lyria begged him not to go, but he went anyways, and he basically got a reputation for being a very successful warrior in battle. But then one day he got news that the enemy was going to basically go through the mountains where Lyria was living. In his hawk form, like flew back there as fast as possible, but he was too late, and the villagers went through the village and basically killed everyone who was there, including Lyria. Lyria and the baby died, and he blames himself for that. And also, I know we talked a little bit about like what mates are, but fun fact, if you lose your mate, so for whatever reason your mate dies before you do, you go crazy. And that's not even just like a funny saying, like he actually went crazy, and apparently he disappeared for 10 years and went psycho, got revenge on all the people who he found out were responsible for killing Lyria and his baby. After his 10 years of going crazy and getting revenge, Maeve summoned him, and basically that's how he became one of her warriors, and she asked him to serve alongside her as prince and commander. So that's kind of Rowan's backstory. So he opens up to Celaena about all that. They basically decide together that they're going to work through their grief together, because that was him basically being like, you know what, you told me about Nehemia, I'm going to tell you about Lyria, and although you didn't lose your mate, you still lost someone close to you, and I've had hundreds of years to recover and I'm still not okay, but it's still very fresh for you, so we're both clearly going through it, so let's just be there for each other. The most iconic sentence in probably this entire book: and somewhere far and deep inside Aelin, an ember began to glow. And with that, I'm going to stop this video. It's been fun. It's been a good time. I cannot wait to record part 3 of Heir of Fire for you guys. This may be a 4-parter just because the book's a little bit longer than the last one. And then I'm excited to jump into Assassin's Blade. I'll see you next week.